Welcome to The Pause, the Hush Hour podcast, in which I, Alicia Davis, sound healer and meditation guide, chat to people I find inspirational and fascinating, and I hope you will too. Sam Lee is a man who wears many hats. Bushcraft practitioner, celebrated musician, eco-activist, storyteller, ex-burlesque dancer, rule breaker, and creative risk taker. Sam was nominated for the Mercury Prize for his very first album, Ground of Its Own. He hasn't looked back since, tirelessly working to raise awareness of the natural world and our place within it. Often, he illustrates this timeless connection through songs and verses with traditional roots that extend way back through time, and which Sam meticulously collects and curates. He also has a very special relationship with another master of song, the Nightingale. This is Sam's story. I mean, really happy to have you take the time out of your busy schedule to come talk to me as well.
Oh, not at all. Very happy to do so.
Oh, that's such a pleasure. And because the last time we actually met in person was on a really, really cold May night last
Yeah,
year. Strange to say last year already, but it was in the last night of Singing with Nightingales. I don't know if you remember.
yeah. I'm trying to remember who the musician was.
It was a
It
cellist. I can't remember his name.
it was from Yorkshire, Jamie Walton.
He wasn't a tall guy. And I remember him yomping through the woods with us, carrying his cello on his back.
It was so cold that
It
night.
was freezing.
It's
I
like,
don't think I've ever been so cold. It really was bitter, bitter, bitter.
oh, May it gets warm, but yes, I remember that night. We had an amazing moon as well, still with us.
Glorious moon, and it was kind of like March temperature rather than May, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I think we were lucky just to have one solitary nightingale left singing.
Did and yeah, that was always the last night is always a very uncertain and yeah, what will be, what will happen.
I was just relieved that one showed up, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, they're always there. It's just whether they sing or not.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true. That's
We
true.
should show up.
And of course, you're planning for the next round of Singing with Nightingales quite soon, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean they're all on sale. I mean it's only 4 months away, so yeah.
Right, so I suppose let me just rewind a little bit because I know you must be really tired after your long day, so I don't want to take up any more time than necessary. So what I thought I'd do is just ask you a little bit about yourself first of all, and your background, then talk about the Nightingales, and then switch back again to your discography a little bit and talk about your music and what inspires you and so on. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. All right. So I think I already know the answer to this, to be honest, because of just the kind of music that you make and the way that you are in yourself. But how important is nature to you?
Um, am I to grade it?
No, don't grade it. I just wanted a sentence that expresses.
That is it. Like, how can I can't believe there are people that humans have got to a place in the world where nature isn't utterly important or that we've forgotten to believe that.
Yeah,
So I don't feel my sense of putting nature as the level of importance that I do as being something that is unusual. I feel that I should be this should be baseline. And I know there are people who are more obsessed than I am. But why we are as a society not obsessed with nature and protecting her and trying to make her better amazes me.
yeah, it's a mystery to me too, and that's kind of why I asked you because I think when I first connected with you to ask you if you'd come and chat, it's because everything that I do is designed to try and reawaken that sense of connection that we're all supposed to have. Because I think, especially, I mean, you've grown up in London. I've spent a very long time in London, and I think when you live in a city, it's easy to forget that
Mm,
you're a part of nature and you actually can't live without it.
mm.
But how often do people walk on the actual ground in London. It's very rare, isn't it? Unless you go to a park, you can visit. You go to the park, or you go out of town for a bit and go to the country.
Yeah.
Not many people get the opportunity to put their bare feet, unless they've got a garden. If you're lucky, you've got a garden. I don't personally.
Mm. But even then, there's the concepts of what is dirty, that is
Yes.
misunderstood, and the things that we consider clean in life in our homes are actually poisonous, and putting your feet on some grass and some soil is somehow, inappropriate, or
Yeah. Yeah. No, we've really been we've had they've done a bit of a turn on us, really, haven't they? In that sense, just making people believe that cleanliness is anti-bac everything,
mm,
and sanitize everything. But it's we have, I don't know how many millions of bacteria live on our skin. It's not normal to be sanitized, and actually, it's bad for you
mm,
to be completely sterile. You can't really thrive if you're sterile. So yeah, that's a weird one for me too, and that's really why I asked you that question, because it seems to me that nature runs through you like the letters in a stick of Blackpool rock. It's kind of like it's just intrinsic, and it's a bit like that for me too, because I've always been um,
unrefined nature.
yeah,
But,
yeah, exactly. Not manicured, ornamental nature, but natural nature as it comes, sort of wild in tooth and claw and thorns and scraggy bits and all of that. And I've always felt the same way, really, since I was very small. It's grieved me to see how humanity treats the natural world, and I'm hoping in
yeah.
my own small way to do a little bit to change that. And I'm sure in your much bigger and way, you're also doing that with your projects and your recordings and so on. So
Yeah, absolutely. In whatever way I can.
how much of an influence has Ray Mears been on your trajectory, would you say?
Oh, well, in the first part of my journey, enormous, like many uh, kids when I was young, and he was a lot younger. I'm talking, when I was like 15, 16 in like 1996 or 97, or
Mm.
Ray Mears was on the television, and he was one of the only people on the screen that I could see were making a life and a living, interacting with nature, learning from indigenous communities, and in a very material way, looking at subsistence and fire and shelter and the kind of elemental essentials. And that was really exciting. And I watched all his programs, and then I ended up having the great joy, age 19, of going and traveling with him in Canada, British Columbia, which was one of those kind of like, pinch yourself, oh my god,
Especially at that age as well, wow, that's just incredible.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very grateful for that, and he taught me a lot of things, and gave me firsthand experience of kind of what wilderness was, but also how present humans and human culture is in the wilderness, in places like that, the Pacific Northwest coast, indigenous communities there, First Nations, and
Oh,
and sense of trust in nature and benevolence and awe and power, and and brutality as well. That it's a wild place there, it's a dangerous place.
yes, yes, absolutely. You forget we're a bit nurtured over here, aren't we? Because we don't really have anything supremely dangerous. Even the adder, you wouldn't probably die if it bit you, but you'd suffer a bit, but you survive.
Exactly, people have, but you have to be really unlucky and kind of, yeah. But when I was with Ray in Canada, we came face to face with a full-grown grizzly bear, um
Oh my God.
less than meters away,
Ah,
centimeters away, and that was a bit of a, I'd never experienced anything like that. So
gosh.
yeah, we have a lucky thing here in the UK, but actually we don't have a lucky thing, because all those top predators have gone. We've removed them. The most dangerous thing is the elements. You can still get killed by nature very easily. People do every year, in the Cairngorms and Ben Nevis and Snowdonia. So you can make terrible mistakes. There are other ways of being affected, but But I think also what goes hand in hand with that is we don't have quite the same level of natural wonder in its prolific, in its state of prolific brilliance in this country as we do in other parallel ecosystems. I do a lot of work in Romania. I'll be leading some pilgrimages in the Southern Carpathians, which is very similar to Great Britain in some ways, primal beech forest. And, you know, that was once what Great Britain was like, exactly, species to species, you know, relatively. So, and we don't have that anymore, and that's a real shame.
It is. There are very few places where you can totally escape, aren't there, that are not in some way affected by human activity. I mean, even in the mountains, or the sheep sort of eating the grass or something like that. You know, it's not wholly natural.
No, no, they are under huge influence of man's control and dominion. And no landscape is not deeply affected by the extractive relationship we have, and also by the mismanagement. You know, not enough healthy relationship that also has benevolent and beneficial influences. The absurd number of deer that we have, and the appalling compartmentalizing, and all the issues that we have of how we're in a kind of level of domestic abuse, I'd say, to our
And it's like it's a suspension of reality, really, isn't it? Because we've come to believe ourselves as the top of the food chain, and really, you know, superior in every way, and yet we're not. We're not in that. We're not in right relationship with nature by any means, because we don't live in harmony with it anymore. And we don't live seasonally. We buy our food from overseas. Most of us don't grow our own food. And we've come to live in this sort of bubble, which is completely fake.
Yeah.
It can only come to some sort of messy end, I think, at some point, and possibly quite soon, until we right this relationship and once again recognize that we have a place within it. We're not on top of it, but we're in it. And I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. So you spoke briefly about your musical journey out when you were mentioning Ray. So did Ray influence your music making, do you think?
Um, Not so much. I remember daring to sing a song or two with him and his then late wife, Rachel, but I was not any inclination towards being a singer at that point. Just liked music. It definitely wasn't on my radar as a career. But 19, who has career on their mind?
Oh, nobody does. It's ridiculous to assume that anyone would at that age. I mean, you don't even know who you are at that age, I think. I mean, some people do, but I don't know.
Inkling. I'm not that much different from them.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I think it keeps you fresh. If you keep your sense of childlike wonder, that's another thing that we all need to recapture, I think. But I suppose what I was wondering was whether the love of nature that Ray inculcated in you informed your musical decisions later on, once you decided. Sorry, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because I've actually forgotten to ask you at what point you made that switch, because you seem so embedded in it now. So maybe we should just.
It's funny how I don't see switch. It's I so what happened? Ray was very influential at a time where I was at art school. I'd sort of been studying for a little bit. I had to drop out of art school because I had some surgery on my eyes. I lost the sight of one of my eyes, and so I was going through kind of a tough kind of end of teens period, and in some ways it was obviously like a mixed blessing, like all these things were, and I had to kind of go like, okay, what am I passionate about? What do I want to do in this world with time that I now have? This kind of gap year that appeared, it's like, well, I love nature, I love wilderness work. I called it survival then, rather. I don't use that term anymore because it's not about surviving, it's about thriving. Um, and so that was like, yeah, I'm going to go into that and explore that. And actually, Ray, from there, I then was led on to other teachers, Thomas Shawcon of Trackways and others who introduced me to very different forms of nature connection, of which there are so many different schools of thought because it's the oldest art in the world in many ways, the nature connection world, the bushcraft. But all the while, I'd always loved music and I'd always loved folk songs. So I didn't know they were folk songs because I'd grown up singing with them, not realizing that a lot of the songs that I'd inherited from my childhood through my teenage years were. And so so at the same time, I was like learning about them, and me and my friends was going to each other's houses and lighting campfires in the garden and going out camping and doing the bushcraft. But also by night, we'd sing the folk song, we'd sing around the fire and in harmony and unison.
Yeah.
That was they would. I never had. There was never a division between them. There was just one excelled. You know, I got better at the bushcraft and my singing just for something I really liked doing, and then you know, as my 20s stepped on and I was doing lots of other things as well. I wasn't just being a kind of woodsman. I the singing kind of like struck me and I learned more about folk song. I suddenly found key teachers within the folk music realm, the kind of Ray Mears equivalents, as it were, who introduced me more and more to the repertoire and the study of folk song. And I realized, wow, here's something that actually in many ways is, I think on now, is not being very dissimilar. It's about, it's a culture and it's a relationship to nature, relationship to community. And bushcraft is, you know, in that work,
Yes.
traditional communities and culture, they would never be separate. The song and the work were one and the same. And we sort of divided them. And
That's very true. That's really true. And because I'm very familiar with a lot of West African people. I have a lot of friends from there, and I spent a lot of time.
your head. I can see your kora, but if it is a kora,
this is a Kamalangoni actually. It's
Ngoni.
looks like a kora, but it's only got 10 strings. I have a kora on this side, but I don't dare take it off its stand because it's gonna fall over for sure. But I was just going to say, because they have a tradition where people will accompany the others working on the land. For example, if they're harvesting, and musicians will come along and sing songs to sort of encourage them. So it's very much integral, and I guess that's a facet of living that we've all forgotten.
Too many of us have forgotten, though it's still there, and it's a wonderful thing that we are reclaiming that. And you know, it was quite hard to realize that separation of what it was, and it's taken years of learning the two and seeing the relationships before realizing how indivisible they are. And but one has to kind of become a master in one before one can start to question it and understand how what its purpose is, now that we don't grind our own wheat and, you know, mill our own flour and scythe our meadows, you know, because life has moved on and we have different lives. But actually how does the music serve its purpose in contemporary society? And that's become an interesting conundrum that I've, you know, trying to understand. How does one bring nature and music in together in a way of reconnection?
And you've become I suppose a curator in a way, haven't you, gathering up old songlines and keeping them alive, and creating. I think you've created a collection, if I'm not wrong. I can't remember where it's housed just at the moment. But I read about that.
I think the songcollectors.org.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you.
My digital forum of all the songs. As a collector, I spent 15 years recording the singers of the Irish Traveller, English Gypsy, and Scots Traveller communities, who were the last of the oral tradition keepers, bearers in the British Isles.
Oh, that must have been very poignant.
Very much, yeah. In fact, it was only last night that I was at a restaurant where I bumped into a family of Irish travellers that I knew, who I'd learned and recorded songs from. by sheer coincidence. And, you know, it's still, the cultures and communities are still out there. They are our griots in that respect.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because you tend to think of those things as belonging to a different culture, but it's no, there are always the equivalents. And I set up a project a few years ago called Ancient Strings and Fabulous Things, which was drawing parallels between the troubadours and
Mm.
the bards and the griots. Um, and that finished when the lead artist passed away, sadly. But you know, it's really nice to draw those lines together and realize it doesn't matter what culture you come from. There's always an equivalent.
Mm, exactly. Yeah, it's and tailoring that to your audience, reading the room, as I always say, is not an easy thing.
No.
How do you make that appealing to you know, an audience of today with many different lives and
Mm.
relationships and interests?
And yet you've managed to pull it off, I think, because you've mixed in so many different influences and instrumentations, and there's a very interesting mix in your albums that I actually wasn't expecting before I actually sat down to listen. And I found it very refreshing because I'm quite a bit older than you. So when I was young, folk music was kind of a little bit dry, sort of performed in dusty church halls and things like that. And it was, what did you say? I couldn't hear.
It is.
Oh, well, I didn't get that impression listening to your music because you've mixed it with so many interesting influences and instruments. So I found
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to say to that, and you know, not to give away my kind of methodology because I don't really have one, but all the songs that we've inherited in the British traditions, the English language tradition, and other, you know, indigenous languages of these islands, is almost 100% unaccompanied a cappella singing.
yeah.
So the minute you put an instrument to it, you're contemporizing it. Guitars were not around 150 years ago. They were certain, you know, fiddle, violins, and clarinets and accordions are relatively modern instruments compared to some of these songs. And the putting them on the songs is a wholly artificial construct, as lovely as it is. And thus, the sort of sound of what folk music is supposed to be, as we have heard it for the last 60, 70 years, is a completely modern interpretation. So to continue doing that in that way, for me, it seems absurd because that's how they did it in the 1950s and 60s. And let's come on, we're in 2000s now. Let's see if we can bring a little bit of modernity, because it's no different. It's as radical sounding now if you put electronics or world instruments. And my practice has always been about, you know, let's open this music up to a more internationally diverse and encompassing acoustic, honoring our place, our music of these islands in respect and in relationship with the indigenous musics of the world. Let's not try and separate ourselves and ghetto ourselves or limit ourselves. So I've always been, you know, a bit of a challenger of a preconception, and it's much more fun because you've got more toys to play with that way, I think.
And you don't want something to become fossilized either, do you? So this is like it makes it a constantly growing, evolving thing.
Yes, except therein lies the conundrum. The minute you press record or you stop pressing record on your recording session, as I've been doing today, the fossilizing has begun.
Yes, I suppose so, but it's incremental, I guess, rather than it, you know, just saying, "Oh, we have to do it this way because that's the way it's always been." That's kind of what I meant.
No, no, I completely agree, but I'm being facetious, but also in that saying that actually where one stops the ossification is the constantly re-challenging it. And actually, and I think the thing about these songs is, although they're old and may have come from a different time, the subjects often are very relevant, and the language and the narrative may be old world, but I think there's a lot of potential for the songs to be reimagined
Mm.
and blown apart and reconstructed to be relevant for today without being so backwards looking.
Yeah.
Respectfulness of the past, very, very important, but also they've got to be robust as messages for the future as well. So how one reforms them and makes relevant is an exciting is an exciting challenge.
I love it. And of course you were awarded a Mercury Prize very early on in your recording career, which it must have been very gratifying.
Months into my recording career. It was wonderful. I was young, and just what a wonderful way to start. Of acknowledgement and endorsement, and I'm immensely grateful for it. I also am aware that in the longer view, in the age of these songs, it's a blip, and as am I. So one shouldn't get sort of too caught up in the sparkle, and remember what you're doing it for.
No, I mean, I don't think you don't strike me as being sort of the big I am. Really, you seem to be very modest about the work that you do, but I think it's worth acknowledging that album. What is it called again? The ground. Oh no, my brain's gone blank. Please remind me.
Ground of Its Own.
Thank you. You have that moment where your mind just goes like a completely blank slate. That just happened to me. Yes, I think it's good to acknowledge. And obviously that's the culmination of a lot of your work up until that point. So it's not like it came out of nowhere. But it's a feather in your cap, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's every song, every album is a step down the road of uncertainty and trying to find meaning. I'm in the studio right now recording, and it's wonderful because I feel like I still don't know very much, and I know a little bit more, but every song is its own challenge of trying to do right and do one's best, and honor what needs to be honor, and not like miss the bigger picture and the bigger purpose. So it's I love it. I always feel like that beginner when I was in 2012 when the album came out, and I'd never made any music before, and I'd never had any musical training, and I just went into a studio and was like, okay, I'm going to just make an album because I love these songs and I want to be creative, and I went to art school, so I've got to know how to make something.
So did I, actually. I was at St. Martin's. You were at Chelsea. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, it's sister schools. So that attitude, the sort of that, like, I can do that, how hard can it be, was there then, still is there now, and also kind of, how the fuck do I do this?
Yeah, it's a coin of phrase. Yes, exactly. And why not? Because that keeps things fresh. If you don't have a set idea about how you're going to do something, then you have to be elastic in your approach. And I think that's always exciting. I think it's like that knife edge of improvisation,
Yeah, edge dwelling. That's what I call it. So
yes, I like that. Right, let's move to Nightingales now, because that's the first place that we met. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about singing with Nightingales, and also Beatrice Harrison, is it Harrison?
Yeah.
Who was your predecessor, I suppose, in terms of singing with Nightingale. Well, she was using her cello. Did she sing as well? I'm not sure, but I think this was the first ever live broadcast. Is that right?
Yeah, on first ever live radio broadcast in 1924.
Amazing.
Yeah, and she pioneered that with the BBC, who were very kind of in their infancy at the time, and she sort of became she was already very famous, but became really like a superstar because of this, and sold millions of copies of her record of the Nightingale that was made later on, and kind of went on extolling the beauties of the Nightingale. She was very influential in the foundations of the RSPB, and yeah, kind of wonderfully, and kind of, yeah, started this idea in this country, though. I mean, she wasn't the first person. She was the first person to go viral with it. This
Okay.
collaboration with Nightingales. And it was a very different thing for her then and what she was doing it for. But there was at its heart also a social impact experiment. You know, she ended up bringing, excuse me, coach loads of kids from inner city London out to her land in Surrey,
Wow.
Foyles riding, and you know, held tea parties for kids and festivals, and really kind of, you know, I think she was a real like rejoicer in nature. So I don't deviate too much from that, other than, you know, I do it on a more kind of contemporary model of night after night concerts from April to May, 45 people a night, no more, no less, and use social media to publicize it, and are up against lots of other even more crazy creative endeavors. So I definitely walk in her footsteps, but I also take it into another journey of narrative, which is about looking at what an experience like this means in an age of extinction, in an age of environmental depletion, and what does singing with nature mean to audiences today, with the level of nature deficit that we have. And it's more than just about nightingales. It's about rewilding humans.
Absolutely. That's such a good way of putting it. Because it's very poignant. I find it very upsetting that since I was a child, because I was born in the 1950s, the late 50s, and there were so many more birds. There were crickets and things everywhere. The place was alive with wild birds, and we used to have bullfinches in our back garden. I grew up in Brighton, and all sorts. Just and we'd feed them. We had a coal bunker. We used to put bird seed out on the bunker, and they'd come up, hopping up, and I find it quite tragic, really, that it's been the bird populations and everything, every other wild creature apart from maybe deer and foxes has been decimated so heavily.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of unfathomable what we've let happen. But I always say it's not too late, and part of the journey in repair and restoration comes through experiences of love and re-enchantment. And you know, as an artist, and using folk songs and using all sorts of music and other musicians, and I'm, you know, working to find ways of telling the story in the most impactful way of where we're at societally, and how it can be a journey of healing of the land, but also of ourselves,
Mm.
to need it just as much as the bullfinches and the nightingales and the turtle doves
I
need.
think there's a very deep, sorry, I butted in there. I just wanted to say, I think there's a very deep kind of unidentifiable chasm in
Mm,
most people that they're probably not able to put their fingers on because of the fact that we live in such a strange, detached way. And so I think it is very healing. I mean, I was thrilled by the whole experience, apart from being freezing. Really, really, it really touched me on a very deep level, because you know, even walking through the woods in pitch black in
mm,
single file, my feet suddenly remembered, and not just that they were there for walking, but there for sensing.
yeah.
And I mean, nobody tripped, nobody twisted their ankle, nobody ended up on their face in a mud puddle. Um, Somehow we all remembered that a different sense that we don't normally use, because we're very visually dominant. But there, in that situation where we weren't and we couldn't be, it became about different ways of sensing your place in that 3D space, and following the exquisite song of that distant nightingale as he walked. I can see it in my head now, walking towards the cleft in the trees, and the sky being just a little bit lighter, and hearing an owl hooting off from that direction. And
Mm,
it was very special.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it comes down what I hear in what you're saying is it's about, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier as well. It's about trust, really. We've forgotten to trust the world around us. We've been so kind of swaddled in the comforts and protection of an environment that is even keeled and flat and robust and health and safety tested.
Yes.
That we've and clean and, you know, ostensibly you know, there for our well-being, that actually we've forgotten to trust what it means like to listen through our feet, and to see through our feet, to listen through our hearts, and to be guided, knowing that there is a deeper way of connecting and receiving, and that we have all the capabilities in us. Our bodies are no different from they were 30,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, really. All the hardware is there. It's just about an operating system that hasn't been allowed to act at its highest state. And that's such a shame, because I think we live deprived lives in that sense.
I'd agree with that.
Yes. And it's all there to be restored, should we dare to. And it's not easy, I'm not saying it's going to be not painless and not cold and not have trips and stumbles and scratches and bruises, but there's a deeper thrill that comes from it, from when one just goes, oh God, what's the worst that could happen? And it's only for one night too. We'd have to live like
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, yes, it's a wonderful experience. And of course, Nightingales have inspired musicians since the year dot.
Yes.
And probably, I suppose, more than any other bird, although I did notice a few birds creeping into your tracks in many of your recordings. Actually, I heard a snipe, and I heard, yes, I heard, what did I hear? Swift, and what was the other one? Also began with an S, actually. What was it? I wrote it down. I can't find it. No, I can't find it now. Skylark. I think I heard Skylark. Did I? Can't remember now. Or else, not Yellowhammer. What was it? Goldfinch or something? I don't know. And I've lost the third one.
Nightingale on one of them.
Nightingale, I definitely heard. Yeah. And anyway.
Red and goldfinch, or
No, that's true. I just heard a bit, and I wasn't sure if it was that or this.
With the snipe, there was something else.
That was it's very distinct.
Incident.
It's such a mad sound.
They weren't contracted. They had they gate crashed that recording session, and you can't pick and choose.
No, you can't, can you? No, I guess, I mean, this, I also heard it on the recording that you made for the was it RSPB?
That's right.
Yeah. Oh no, my brain.
Let Nature Sing.
Thank you. Sorry. The facts come into my head and they dive straight out again. This happens to me sometimes. Anyway, yes, Let Nature Sing. So do you think that had an impact on people?
God, yeah. I mean, it got to number 18 in the music charts, so it was listened to by hundreds of thousands of people and was played on radio throughout the few weeks, and on the chart show, which gets listened to by millions. So it's like, never has birdsong outside of the back window been so prominent in the kind of media domain. It was a real thrill to get to create that song for the RSPB, and
I can imagine
impact it made.
Wonderful hand puppetry as well.
The video was terrific. Really
it made me cry a little bit, actually. It was quite sad, but also very important to push that message, I think. I don't know if you want to talk about this. I'm just checking my notes here, but there was a a slightly tragic turn to on your path to becoming a collaborator with Nightingales that I read about,
Mm.
uh, and that you later sing about on, hang on, I'm going to have a look, on the Tanyard side.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I was sharing, I go into it in more depth than I will now in the book, The Nightingale Notes on a Songbird. And it spurred me on my journey. But the family that introduced me to nightingales when I first heard a bird in Sussex, it's a lovely Sussex family, the Rentons, and yeah, went to listen to a nightingale, and the sister of my friend gave birth the night of that after we listened to the Nightingales, and very tragically, only about 9 months later or so, she was killed with her first daughter in a car accident in where they lived in Kenya, and
It's so sad.
yeah, and it's I mean, I've lots more to say on it than I will now, but it's, you know, whenever I hear the nightingale, I hear many things. I hear many worlds and entities, but I also hear Polly and Sita, those two gorgeous humans who are now just exist in another realm, and definitely in the Song of the Nightingale.
Yeah, yeah. I found that story very moving, and I'm just going to show the book actually for the benefit of anyone who hasn't seen it. And it's a beautiful book.
Oh.
Lots of bookmarks in there.
And
Um,
people say the book's coming out in paperback finally in March this
oh,
year.
great! That's good. That's good. I mean, it's beautiful. I like the hardback version, to be honest. I like the way it feels, looks, but it's easier to carry around in paperback. So let's go on a little bit now. So, oh, sorry, just bear with me a second. Oh, yes, that's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask it earlier and then it slipped out of my mind. How on earth do you choose the musicians to come and collaborate?
Well, I do it with my team at the Nest Collective, who my events company, who produce the Single Nightingales experiences, as well as all the other concerts that we do and other projects and programs. And the programmer Tom and me spend our year just gathering names and people who we'd love to, and then getting requests from lots of musicians, can we come and perform? And the joy is trying to find the right musicians, and the right musicians aren't always the best musicians either. And not saying that we have bad musicians, but
No,
often,
I know what you mean, though. Yeah.
yeah, the musicians who will get it and be able to, in that space, be able to respond and make connection. And the birds are respond very differently, but depending on the musician. Some musicians not interested. So I'm very good now at knowing the sorts of musicians who are got that, you know, that antennae plucked up and are tuned in.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to hammer dulcimer with a nightingale?
Well, I would love to get the hammer dulcimer. The issue is the hammer dulcimer is they're very big and hard to travel with, particularly walking in the dark through the woods. They are also nightmares to tune. Uh, the 48 string, 42 strings, or whatever of a hammer dulcimer in the dark to tune up in the cold, damp air is almost impossible. So
Have you thought of that?
one day I used to play with a hammer dulcimer player. He toured with me for many years, and I love the instrument dearly. But I recorded with them on the last album. But no, there are some instruments you just know. Pianos, impossible. Uh,
Some,
concert harps, yeah,
especially a concert harp, that could be a real issue, couldn't it? But yeah, maybe a Celtic harp could work, but even then, I guess it could slip out of tune.
yeah. So it's always a challenge, and finding musicians who will brave their instruments into those conditions as well. So
Yeah, that's also true, isn't it? Yeah, I can imagine that some might be a bit precious about carrying them over muddy fields and in those, what it might be possibly raining. And yeah, have you ever picked anyone and it's gone disastrously wrong, or is it all really serendipitous?
I couldn't possibly say. No
Sorry, no, I
comment.
shouldn't have asked that question. That wasn't very thoughtful of me. It just came into my head, so I asked it. Okay. And I can tell you, actually, I wanted to talk about the year that obviously everything went online.
Well, that was actually the time that we got to be able to work with musicians that would never have been able to come out into the field. So we had piano players like Bill Lawrence from Snarky Puppy, and we had, um, oh my God, we had like the Indian singer, what's her name, Jahani Harrison, and Pet Shop Boys, and and all sorts of uh, luminaries came and were able to do music with the birds by nature of being able to do it from their studio and digitally and online. So that opened it out to a whole new audience, which
I was
was
going to say it must have expanded your reach exponentially, I would have thought.
oh, indeed. I mean, the first broadcast that we did on Earth Day, we had, at live, we had thousands of people around the world listening in. It's been listened to over 50,000 times, that 4 hour broadcast. It's obviously been listened to many more people, but and we did lots of live versions, and they've been hugely appreciated, particularly for those who can't come into the woods for one reason or another, be that accessibility, be that be that location where they live. So we have a lot of international listeners for that who can't make it. So it's a good way of getting the birds out beyond their very limited habitat.
Yeah, I think I was probably amongst those many thousands that listened on Earth Day. I think actually I found it very supportive during the whole stress of the lockdown thing, because it was difficult for everybody.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I just found it very uplifting and soothing. It soothed my soul to listen to the nightingale and to listen to the musicians working so sympathetically and so sincerely in most cases. And the one that actually made me giggle somewhat is Abel Silacere, because I remember you doing a sort of whisper, Abel, you're supposed to start straight away. That made me laugh.
Oh, I've forgotten that. I'll never forget having him out in the woods when he came and did it in 2019. Was incredible musician. And,
He
wonderful.
seems to be, I've never met him, but I know musicians that work with him, and he seems to be a really lovely guy. And I can imagine that it must have been spectacular.
Yeah, he. I will never forget the night he came into the woods. It was one of the best that we've ever had, for sure.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry that I missed that one. Yeah, cool. So, oh yes, last question about the nightingales. Oh, no, first of all, my own experience. I'll just briefly insert that. First time I ever heard a live nightingale, I was in the north of France
Mm.
and sleeping actually, or just about on the borders of sleeping. And then from across the fields far away, I suddenly heard this song. And even though I'd never heard it live, I knew immediately what it was. And it made all the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Of course, I woke up. I couldn't sleep through that. I had to sort of sit up and really listen, because there was nothing else, and because there were no boundaries, no walls or anything between the nightingale and myself. It travelled really easily and beautifully and clearly
Mm.
through the atmosphere, and it was absolutely wonderful experience.
I
And
know.
I was just going to ask you, do you feel somehow as if the bird chose you?
um, there's something so very um, something about that question I don't know how to answer.
It is a
Because
provocative question.
no, I mean that in a uh, who knows? I'm an opportunist. I found something beautiful. I
Mm.
I found a beautiful way of doing something with something beautiful. Um, and it's not the only, I'm not exclusive to the nightingale. And I think the paths that led me to recognize that chose me, that recognize nightingales and that possibility are were pre-designed. And the nightingale is the amazing gift for having leaned into fate in that respect.
Totally. Well, it's wonderful. I think you're very blessed to have found such a way to express yourself.
Well, the blessing is that I found a way to economically justify myself going 5 nights a week into the woods to be with nightingales. If it was just a little hobby, I would get to do it once, maybe twice or 3 times a year. But I've created a career out of it, which is rather,
It's
kind of.
wonderful. I mean, what could be better
I mean, I
than
have no idea what could be better. I haven't found anything better yet. But there is nothing stopping the rest of this nation doing exactly the same thing. And I write a whole piece in the book called How to Do a Nightingale. And it's this idea that what I do is totally doable by anybody. I'm just a guide. I really am. I'm just somebody that people trust, that will show them it and do it nicely, and they'll get looked after if they pays their money as they come along. But actually, it's totally free, and you don't even need musicians, or you just bring a little Bluetooth speaker and get some nice cello or whatever you like, or read some poems with friends. I
yeah.
do a whole like how to. I actually kind of implore people not to come and do it with me. Do it yourself. It's much cheaper.
I have read those words. Yes, I remember you saying that. But I mean, it's beautiful. It's a lovely experience to share it with a group of people,
Mm.
eat together, to eat food that's been cooked over an open fire, and to sit around and listen to you singing songs and the instruments that are accompanying you. It's really, really magical from start to finish, apart from the temperature.
My friends all jest and say that actually, Sam, what you've done is you've created a way of getting paid to have a dinner party every night and meet loads of lovely people. And that for me is like the jammy bit, which is that because I love people as much as I love nightingales, I actually love people, and the kind of entertaining and being there is what is really special. And seeing people, meeting people in that moment of like wonder, and that's what I really love about it. I get to really like spend time with the group every night, as opposed to when I'm doing gigs and I'm on stage and there's this big, fourth wall and division between me, and I come on off one way and everyone goes off the other, and there's no interaction. There's a real sort of segregation, and I loathe that. I find that very kind of lonesome. So this is a way of me doing a gig where I get to do a bit of singing and telling stories, and I also get to, you know, share food. Yeah, and that's for me the greatest blessing.
Wonderful. Have you heard of the prophecy of the eagle and the condor?
I have indeed, yeah.
I kind of feel that we're in that process right now,
Mhm.
hopefully, and that one day these two will fly again, wingtip to wingtip, and that.
And do you mean that in that there is a kind of European equivalent happening?
Well, yeah, I suppose I mean in the awakening of those of us who have forgotten about this connection. I think this is a crucial part in the work that you're doing. I hope that the work I'm doing also plays a small part in this awakening, and that once people realize their relationship to nature, that it will restore the balance and the harmony between.
As this is probably going to be listened to other people, and I'd be interested to hear your interpretation of the eagle and the condor prophecy.
Well, I came across it in relation to South American culture and shamanism, and what I read about that was that the condor represents the South.
Mm.
It represents the indigenous, and the eagle represents the Northern Hemisphere and the modern way of life, the more left brain, logical. Not the Southern Hemisphere is more about the intuitive side. The Northern Hemisphere is more of the logical, sort of rational, um, supposedly, way of relating to everything. And I think for me, what this means is that we need to bring ourselves into balance, and to reawaken that intuition, that instinct, and actually balancing the masculine and feminine, because it's also, I think, about that too. And that once we realize and accept equally the masculine and the feminine that exists in both men and women, that harmony will once again be restored.
That's really interesting. It's actually a different interpretation, but one that probably is just as true. As with all these stories, they have many different multiple different layers to them. But I know of the eagle and the condor prophecy is that, as you're saying, the condor is the spirit bird of the South Americas, and the eagle is the spirit bird of the Northern Hemisphere and of the indigenous people of the North American continent. And they are of the same lineage, many of, in many different ways, but they've been separated for thousands of years. And the prophecy is about the unification of the different tribes that is now happening, where the North and South are meeting in their own with their own belief systems and uniting as a one people to empower in change within the entire land masses. And that's a deeply that, as you're saying, comes out of modernity, that it's one of the great benefits of modernizing and transport and the new world emerging, that has allowed the meeting of people, of tribal members that would never have met, and that exchange. So it's funny, that's been always my understanding of that prophecy.
I'm sure that's right, and I think maybe the version that I read had been slightly interpreted from a sort of Western perspective, but the principle of it, I think, is still. I think it feels really important to me, a bit like the Hopi prophecy in the Rainbow Tribe and that sort of thing, that awakening. And I think that I think young people have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, and it's a big job for them to come out from under the. I don't want to use the word oppression, but I can't think of another word at the moment. The sort of technical obsession, should we say, then instead. They've grown up with, and they don't know life without tech. I grew up, there were no mobile phones and no computers, so I remember what it was like just to go out for a long walk, and nobody would know where I was, and I'd have no means of contacting anyone to say, oh, I'll be half an hour or anything like that. I think there's a big rediscovery, relearning that young people probably have to do in order to come out from under.
Yeah, I'm much to say on that. I like you. I'm not a digital native. I just missed the mobile phone explosion in my childhood, and so bloody grateful.
I am too. And then the last question, and I'm going to let you go and have your evening back, is what gets you out of bed in the morning? Your alarm clock.
The fourth snooze button not working. That's what gets me out.
What's the thing day after day that gets you going?
I wish I was a more Zen person than you both think I am. What gets me out of bed? The pressure to do everything that I said I would do. The fear of failure. That's what gets me out. It's not some sort of like, oh, I've got to bless the sun, and no, it's like most of the time panic and uncertainty and and also great excitement and joy.
Yes, thank you. That was what I was looking for.
I'm as chaotic as I am, calm, but I love my bed. I love it. I could stay in there for hours.
Yeah. Really? Well, I think I've come to the end of my questions, actually, Sam. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and talking to me when you must be absolutely exhausted after all that work in studio. I know how tiring it is. Actually, I really love working in studio, but it is quite draining. So I really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, really lovely to share. Thank you for such good questions, and yeah, coming from a place of such love and respect for it all yourself.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. And the same to you, actually, because one of the things I really appreciate is the loving generosity that you demonstrate when you're running your events and when you're singing your songs and so on. So we look forward to the next album.
Yes, it's
When is that likely to be coming out?
I think June.
Are we allowed to know what it's called?
Nope.
Right.
I will say it's lots of the songs are on a film coming out in April called The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which is a beautiful feature about a fictional film about a pilgrimage, with Jim Broadbent in the lead. So some songs from it are that, and the songs are all very much relating to the land. I love that. It's a real, for me, it's my first full-on nature album. So,
And have I missed anything? Let me just check. I don't think so.
and with my commercial hound, what I will say
Oh,
is,
yeah, come on.
anyone's listening, the Single Nightingales happens April to end of May. Tickets do sell out, so you have to get in there quick. And yeah, please buy the book. Follow it all on social media. I do keep lots of things going on there, as awful as that world is.
Oh,
But
let me just show the book cover again so people know what to look for. Beautiful book. It's fantastic to read, very informative. I love it. It's great. Get your copy now.
it's not just about nightingales.
No. That's it. I think. I don't think I can say any more, and I'll let you have the rest of your time. And blessings. Thank you. Thank you.
You too. All the best, Alicia.
Thank you. I will let you go now.
All right. All the best.
Thanks.
Many
Take care.
thanks. Yeah. Bye bye.
Hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Trust, I'm going to get my ticket for this year.
Oh yeah, let me know when you're coming.
I will, definitely. All right, take care.
All the best. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I thought he was an angel bright, come tripping down so low, saying, kind sir, I'm a country boy, and modest to me he plied, and I daily labor for my bread down by the tan yard side.